Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we'll spend some quiet time with ancient Egypt and move through it slowly, as if we were walking beside the Nile after the sun has gone down. There are temples here and tombs and kings, of course, but there are also small things that make the civilization feel closer and more human, like bread, reeds, ink, linen, shadows on stone, and the long habit of looking up at the stars. If you enjoy these gentle nights of history, you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment if you'd like, perhaps with where you're listening from tonight, or what calm topic you might like to visit next. For now, there is no hurry at all. Let the room grow softer, let your shoulders settle, and allow the desert wind, the river water, and the slow turning of old time to drift in around you. And as we begin, we can imagine that we are standing near the edge of Egypt's great river, where so much of its story first gathered, and where so many of its quiet facts still seem to wait. Ancient Egypt began in the simplest sense with water. That may sound too plain for such a famous civilization, but the Nile was never only a river. It was a path, a field, a calendar, a boundary, and a kind of patient teacher. Each year, in a rhythm that people learned to trust, the river rose and left behind rich, dark soil. In a land where much of the world was dry and bright and hard, that black earth mattered deeply. It held life. It held grain. It held the possibility of villages becoming towns, and towns becoming cities, and cities becoming kingdoms. The people who lived along the Nile did not need to understand the full science of flooding to know that the river arrived and receded and changed everything. They watched it closely, they measured it, they remembered the level of the water from one season to the next. A good flood could mean comfort, a weak flood could mean worry. In that way, the river was not distant, it was part of the daily conversation of survival, and the landscape around that water was unusual. On either side of the Nile, the desert stretched outward in pale silence. So Egypt became a long, narrow world, with a bright river running through it like a ribbon of life. Travel was often easier along the water than across the land. Boats moved with grain, stone, cloth, reeds, and people. It is one of the quiet wonders of ancient Egypt that so much of its unity grew from this simple, graceful line of water through the sand. When we picture the civilization, we often imagine immense monuments, but before the monuments there were fields and canals and mud brick homes and the small repeated actions that keep a society alive. A child carrying water, a farmer watching the sky, a boatman reading the current, a scribe noting a count of grain. Over time, these ordinary moments built a world that would last for thousands of years. And that long duration is one of the first remarkable facts about ancient Egypt. It did not remain exactly the same, of course. No civilization does. Dynasties rose and faded, language shifted, customs changed, rulers came and went. But Egypt endured in a way that still feels almost unusual. It was not one frozen moment in stone. It was a living civilization with a very long memory. That memory is visible everywhere if we know how to look for it. In tomb paintings, people carry offerings. In temple walls, gods receive gifts. In burial chambers, the dead are surrounded by objects meant for another life. And yet the simplest things often tell us the most. The shape of a loaf of bread, the weave of a basket, the curve of a fishing net, the delicate line of ink on a papyrus page. Egypt was a land of monument and detail at the same time, huge and small, grand and domestic, powerful and practical, and perhaps that is part of why it still feels so present to us. It is not only the size of the pyramids. It is the feeling that someone long ago once lived a day much like our own, marked by work, weather, food, family, and the hope that tomorrow would come quietly enough. The people of early Egypt lived with the river, not above it. Their homes were often made of mud brick, cooler than stone in the heat. Their tools were fashioned for cutting grain, shaping wood, and working reed fibers. They grew barley and wheat, and they made beer, which was not a luxury drink so much as a daily staple in many homes. Bread and beer appear again and again in records from ancient Egypt, so often that they almost feel like the two steady companions of ordinary life. There is something soothing in that image, even now. A river, a loaf, a cup, a reed pen, the slow arithmetic of seasons. And from those steady things, a remarkable civilization began to take shape, not all at once but in layers like silt settling after the flood. One of the quiet revolutions of ancient Egypt was writing. To see a line of hieroglyphs is to feel at once both the beauty and the discipline of the system. The symbols can appear decorative to a modern eye, but they were also practical, precise, and deeply useful. Egyptian writing served many purposes. It recorded offerings, titles, names, prayers, taxes, property, letters, and royal declarations. It helped preserve memory. It gave shape to administration. It allowed a kingdom to count, to sort, to store, and to remember. The scribes who wrote these texts occupied an important place in Egyptian society. Learning to write was not quick or casual. It took years. The signs had to be recognized, copied, and combined correctly. A scribe needed patience, a steady hand, and a good memory. In a world where most people did not write, the ability itself carried prestige. The writing materials were often modest. Papyrus came from a plant that grew in wet areas of the Nile region. From it, Egyptians created sheets for writing and sometimes long rolls. Ink was made from simple substances like carbon black and ochre. Brushes or reed pens carried the words. It is easy to imagine the silence of a workroom, the faint scrape of the reed, the pause before a sign was chosen. Hieroglyphs are famous for their visual richness, but Egypt also used other scripts for faster, everyday writing. That is one of the interesting things about the civilization. It had a public face, ceremonial and carved in stone, and also a working face, used for letters, lists, and daily administration. A kingdom that large could not survive on ceremonial language alone. It needed practical marks on papyrus, records in storage, and accounts kept in order. The scribes helped make the state legible to itself. And because writing endured, we can hear so much of Egypt more directly than we might otherwise. We know of work disputes, legal arrangements, personal names, offerings to the dead, medical advice, and school exercises. The written record gives us not only kings and gods, but people trying to settle arguments, count grain, send messages, and remember a name correctly. This is one of the most comforting things about old writing systems. They preserve ordinary thought. A royal inscription may celebrate victory, but a household note may reveal a meal, a task, or a small complaint. A tomb wall may promise eternity, while a scrap of papyrus may simply ask for something to be delivered. Ancient Egypt was deeply formal in many ways, yet the surviving texts often feel intimate. They show a civilization that worried about names and offerings and dates, and whether a shipment arrived on time. Some of the records feel almost familiar, even now. A list is still a list, an account is still an account, a letter still hopes to reach someone, and there is another gentle fact here. The Egyptians believed that words had power. To write a name was not merely to identify someone, it was to hold that person in memory. In tombs, names were carved carefully. In prayers, names of gods were spoken with respect. In a culture that valued the afterlife, the written name became a bridge between presence and absence. You can imagine the scribe at work in the cool part of the day, knees folded, papyrus rolled open, the world reduced for a moment to line, symbol, and breath. It is a small image, but it fits Egypt well. For all its enormous stone architecture, the civilization also rested on fine, careful marks made one by human hands. When people think of ancient Egypt, they often think first of pharaohs, but most Egyptians did not live in palaces. They lived in houses made for daily life, not ceremony. Many homes were built of mud brick, a material well suited to the climate. Walls could be thick enough to help with heat. Roofs might be flat, used for sleeping during warmer nights or for storage. Inside, the furnishings were simple by modern standards, though not without care. Mats, low stools, baskets, jars, linens, and wooden boxes appear in household life. A family might keep treasured items wrapped or stored safely away. and the arrangement of a home would reflect both usefulness and the available space. Meals were built around bread and grain. Barley and emmer wheat were especially important. Bread could take many forms, from coarse loaves to more refined ones, and beer often accompanied the meal. Vegetables, onions, garlic, dates, figs, lentils, fish, and occasionally meat added variety when available. Food in ancient Egypt was seasonal and local, shaped by harvests, storage, and the river itself. Imagine for a moment the small repetition of a morning: grinding grain, pouring water, mixing dough, shaping bread, checking the jars. These tasks were not extraordinary, but they were the steady pulse of life. They were repeated with the same kind of patient attention that most homes in every age still require. Children would have grown up amid these routines, learning by watching. They might help gather water, tend animals, or carry messages. Education depended on family circumstances and social class. Some children learned crafts from their parents. Others, especially those in scribal or priestly paths, were trained more formally. A child's future in Egypt could depend greatly on the household into which they were born, but every household still shared the rhythms of dawn, heat, work, and evening. Clothing was usually light, practical, and suited to the climate. Linen was especially valued. It breathed well in the heat, and it could be woven in fine or plain forms depending on wealth and purpose. Jewelry, cosmetics, and grooming mattered too, not only for beauty, but for status, protection, and daily care. Ancient Egyptians, like people everywhere, were attentive to appearance in ways that reflected their culture, their climate, and their beliefs. And there is something quietly human in the objects that survive from homes and workshops. A comb, a spoon, a makeup container, a toy, a spindle, a jar seal. Such things do not announce themselves as grand history, but they reveal how people lived within the larger system around them. The day in ancient Egypt would often begin with the cool of morning and then gradually turn toward the warmth of midday. Work could be tiring in the heat, and so the hours mattered. People planned around the climate. Shade was precious, water was precious. The evening, when it came, likely brought relief. If we listen softly, we can imagine those evenings: the fading light on the river, the smell of cooked grain, the sound of someone calling across a courtyard, the close hush that follows a day of labor. It is easy to think of the ancient world as remote, but the daily life of Egypt had a texture that remains familiar. People worked, people ate, people washed, people argued, people rested, people hoped for order. That steady, recurring pattern is part of what made the civilization enduring. It was built not only in stone but in routine. Ancient Egypt is often remembered for its gods, and for good reason. Its religious world was large, intricate, and deeply woven into daily life. Gods were not distant decorations on the edge of society. They were present in temples, in prayers, in festivals, in names, in protective amulets, and in the meanings attached to ordinary events. The divine world in Egypt was crowded with familiar forces. Sunlight, fertility, kingship, protection, wisdom, motherhood, magic, the river, the sky, the underworld. Each had a place, and often several. This does not mean the religion was simple to summarize. Far from it. Different cities favored different gods. Beliefs changed over time. Some deities blended together. Some rose in importance for a period, then settled into quieter roles. Egyptian religion was not a single fixed picture. It was a living tradition, adapting while preserving memory. The sun mattered greatly, as one might expect in a bright land. The daily journey of the sun across the sky and through the underworld at night became part of a deep religious imagination. The Nile mattered too. So did the sky, the earth, and the boundary between life and death. These were not abstract ideas only. They were woven into the practical world people knew. Temples served as important centers, not only for worship, but for organization and storage. They could be places of ritual, administration, and economic power. Priests cared for sacred spaces and performed ceremonies meant to maintain order. In a civilization that prized balance, the proper honoring of gods was believed to matter for the well-being of the land. And then there is the Egyptian attention to death. which can seem mysterious from a distance, though it often comes from a very practical and loving place. Egyptians did not see death as simple disappearance. They imagined continuing existence, transformation, and the need for care after burial. Tombs were prepared with food, furniture, texts, and objects that could support the dead. Names were preserved, offerings were made, the deceased were remembered. Mummification is one of the most famous features of this tradition. The process was complex and developed over time. It was meant to preserve the body as well as possible, because the body remained important in the journey beyond life. The methods and costs could vary greatly. Not everyone received the same treatment, but the underlying concern was shared across many centuries, to care properly for the dead so they might endure. There is a calmness in that intention, even if the details seem unfamiliar. It is, in part, a way of saying that love should not stop at the grave, that a name should still be spoken, that memory should continue. Burial chambers, coffin texts, amulets, and funerary rituals all reflect this quiet seriousness. The dead were not simply gone, they had become part of another landscape, one that required guidance, protection, and offerings. In that imagined world, spells and prayers did not feel decorative. They were practical tools for passage. Some of Egypt's best-known tombs belonged to rulers, but many ordinary people also prepared for death according to their means. The scale changed, yet the belief in continuation remained. A small painted coffin could carry the same human hope as a grand royal monument, even if in a simpler form. This is one of the reasons ancient Egypt continues to fascinate people. It did not divide life and afterlife in a careless way. It treated existence as layered, connected, and worth preparing for. Every object in a tomb, every line on a wall, every charm on a body, was part of a larger effort to keep order in the face of change. It is difficult to think about ancient Egypt without imagining monuments. The pyramids, the temples, the colossal statues, the carved obelisks, the painted tombs, all seem to rise out of the desert in memory as if they had always been there. Yet every one of those structures began as labor, planning, measurement, transport, and time. The pyramids are especially famous and often misunderstood as if they were built by magic rather than by organized human effort. They were the product of remarkable coordination. Stone had to be quarried, moved, shaped, and placed. Workers needed food, water, shelter, tools, and supervision. The whole undertaking required not only skill but administration. Egypt was capable of this because it had developed a state that could organize labor over long periods. That does not make the monuments less mysterious. In some ways, it makes them more moving. They were not accidents of nature. They were human decisions made visible in stone. The pyramids also changed over time. Early burial structures developed into the more familiar pyramid form, and later dynasties built in different styles and at different scales. The Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom each left their own mark on the landscape. Egypt was not one single artistic moment. It was a long sequence of experimentation, repetition, refinement, and memory. Temple building was equally impressive. Some temples were immense processional spaces, designed to honor deities and support ritual life. Walls and columns were carved with scenes of gods, kings, offerings, and victory. In these places, architecture did not stand alone. It carried writing, image, and meaning all at once. A carved wall could be read, admired, and used in ceremony. The materials themselves mattered. Limestone, sandstone, granite, wood, mudbrick, and metal all had their places. Each substance came with its own difficulty. Granite was hard and demanding. Wood could be scarce in some regions. Stone had to be cut with care. Paint had to be prepared. The finished surface might look serene, but behind that serenity was intensive work. When we stand in front of a relief in a museum, it is easy to focus on the elegance of the line. Yet that line was once part of a larger labor network. Quarry workers, artisans, transport crews, scribes, overseers, painters, and priests all played roles. Great monuments were never made by a single hand. And because so much of Egypt has survived, sometimes only in fragments, we are left to imagine the sound of the workshops. The tap of a chisel, the scrape of stone, the call to lift, to measure, to set, a pile of blocks in the sunlight, dust in the air, water carried to the workers, the slow progress of a wall rising. There is a tender kind of patience in ancient Egyptian building. It assumes that the future is worth preparing for, that a king may wish for an eternal resting place, that a god may deserve a lasting house, that a name, if carved deeply enough, can remain. Of course, monuments also expressed power. They told stories about order, authority, victory, and divine favor. A giant statue did not merely decorate a site, it announced a presence. It asked to be seen, remembered, and respected. But even so, the effect on us now is not only political. It is atmospheric. We feel the distance of time. We feel the effort. We feel the strange calm of stone that has outlasted so many lives. Ancient Egypt knew how to work on a monumental scale, but it also knew how to carve a tiny amulet, paint a narrow coffin interior, and write a blessing on a scrap of papyrus. Its greatness was not only in size, it was in range. The rulers of Egypt are among the most recognizable figures in world history. We often call them pharaohs, a word that later became a general term for Egypt's kings. Their authority was linked closely to religion and order. The ruler was not just a political leader. In many periods, he was also viewed as part of the sacred structure that kept Egypt stable. Kingship was tied to the heavens, to ritual, and to the balance of the land. That said, power in ancient Egypt was never only a male story. Queens and royal women could hold considerable influence, depending on the period and the circumstances. Some acted as regents, some as diplomatic figures, some as ceremonial centers of the royal household, and a few came to rule in their own right. The royal court could be a place of alliance, family, succession, and careful presentation. Names like Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Cleopatra have become especially famous, though they belong to different eras and different political worlds. Each reflects something about how flexible and how formal Egypt's royal system could be. In some cases, a woman's rule required new visual language. In others, her role may have been more private but still significant. The royal household was not simply a backdrop, it was a living institution. Egyptian rulers were often represented in idealized form. They appear youthful, composed, and strong, even when actual life was more complex. This was not accidental. Royal art was meant to project stability and permanence. A king might age and change, but the image of kingship remained steady. That steadiness also appears in regalia and symbols. Crowns, staffs, scepters, ceremonial clothing, and ritual gestures all helped communicate authority. The physical objects carried meaning beyond their material form. To see a ruler holding a symbol was to see order itself, or at least the claim to it. Yet even kings depended on others. Bureaucrats, generals, priests, artisans, and local officials all supported the system. Court life could be elegant, but it also required administration. Grain had to be stored. Taxes had to be assessed. Labor had to be organized. Messages had to move. Roads and waterways had to remain usable. In the quiet background of royal power was the country itself, with its fields, villages, and laboring households. A crown without a functioning land behind it would have been only ornament. Egypt understood this. Its royal image was grand, but its administrative machinery was equally important. And because Egypt lasted so long, the shape of kingship changed. The Old Kingdom rulers were not the same as New Kingdom conquerors. The Egyptian state was sometimes unified, sometimes strained, sometimes invaded, sometimes reconfigured. It endured by adapting. That long adaptation is part of what makes Egypt so rich to study. It resists a single snapshot. One dynasty may emphasize pyramid building. Another may emphasize temple renewal. Another may expand into foreign lands. Another may preserve older forms while adjusting to new realities. The civilization keeps moving, even while it preserves the look of permanence. There is something deeply human in that tension. We want our lives to feel steady, but life always changes. Egypt built images of unchanging order because change was always near. Perhaps that is why its art and royal language feel so composed. They were not naive, they were carefully made responses to uncertainty. A king seated in profile, a queen with elegant posture, a courtier carrying an offering, a scribe recording the moment, all of them together form a world that looks still from a distance, but was in fact always in motion. Ancient Egypt was not only a civilization of stone, it was also a civilization of craft. The objects that survive from tombs and settlements show a remarkable attention to making. Jewelry gleams with gold, carnelian, turquoise, faience, and other materials that caught the light. Boxes are shaped with care. Furniture is built for comfort and status. Vessels are formed from clay, stone, or metal. Cosmetics are stored in small containers. Weaponry is decorated as well as functional. Even everyday things could carry beauty. Color mattered enormously in Egyptian art. Blue could suggest the heavens, water, or the divine. Green could evoke renewal and vitality. Gold carried associations with brilliance and the sun. Red, black, white, and yellow each had their own visual and symbolic life. Egyptian painters did not use color casually. They placed it with intent. One of the lovely features of Egyptian art is its clarity. Figures are often shown in carefully organized ways, with patterns and conventions that make the world legible. A person may be shown in profile with the eye facing forward, or in a combination of viewpoints that presents what was considered essential. This can look unusual to modern viewers, but it reflects a different visual logic, one that valued recognition, order, and completeness. Artifacts from tombs reveal this skill in miniature. A comb may be carved with fine detail. A game board may have been used by many hands. A mirror can still reflect a little of the old intention behind it. A model boat may suggest travel, movement, and the journey of the dead. A painted coffin may feel like a whole enclosed world. Craft in Egypt was not separated sharply from religion or administration. A decorated bowl could be both beautiful and meaningful. A protective amulet could be small enough to rest in the palm. A ritual vessel might be plain to us yet powerful to the people who used it. The line between art and utility was often gentle, not absolute. This is especially clear in the tomb objects preserved for the afterlife. Egyptians equipped their dead with items they believed would be useful, comforting, or necessary. Some objects were practical, some ceremonial, some symbolic. The collection as a whole formed a kind of world in miniature. Imagine the artisan at work, choosing a color, shaping a curve, polishing a surface. Imagine the seller at market, weighing goods carefully. Imagine a household repairing a vessel instead of replacing it. Ancient Egypt was a society with expertise in making things last. That concern with durability may explain part of the visual power of the civilization today. We still see it because so much was built to endure. We see it in the pigments surviving on sheltered walls, in carved names, in jewelry buried with the dead, in tiles, in faience, in papyrus fragments, in the worn edges of tools. And yet not everything was meant for eternity. Some beautiful things were made for ordinary use, then vanished as people used them up. The surviving record is therefore partial. It favors the durable, the buried, the stone, the protected, the carefully stored. This means that ancient Egypt's full daily beauty was likely even greater than what remains. There is a softness to that thought. So much of human making disappears, but some part of it stays waiting in the dust. A painted band on a coffin, a bead in the sand, a wooden figure, a handled jar, a tiny scarab. These objects are small, but they carry the patient attention of their makers, and through them the civilization feels less distant, more intimate, and a little easier to rest beside. Temples in ancient Egypt were not quiet museums in the modern sense. They were active centers of religious life, prestige, and organization. A temple might hold cult images, store offerings, maintain ritual schedules, and support a staff of workers and priests. Some temples were highly restricted. while others had processional activity that brought the sacred into public view. The role of a temple was not only to honor a deity, it was also to sustain order. Rituals were believed to help maintain the balance of the universe. Offerings, prayers, purifications, and festivals all contributed to that larger pattern. In Egypt, the sacred and the administrative could overlap very naturally. Festival days especially gave life a special rhythm. Images of gods might be carried in procession. Communities gathered. Music, chanting, scent, food, and movement transformed the ordinary pace of the day. A festival could refresh the connection between people, gods, and the land. It offered an interruption, but a meaningful one, not a disruption without purpose. Music in ancient Egypt would have taken many forms, though not all of it survives in detail. We know of instruments such as harps, lutes, flutes, and percussion. We see musicians in art. We hear hints of performance in scenes of celebration and ritual. The soundscape of ancient Egypt was likely varied and alive, moving between the solemn and the festive. Clothing and adornment may also have changed for ceremonial occasions. Clean linen, jewelry, perfume, and careful grooming all contributed to the feeling of order. A ritual space was often prepared with precision. Purity, in the Egyptian religious sense, had both symbolic and practical dimensions. The temple complex itself could include storage, workshops, gardens, and water access. This reminds us again that sacred life in Egypt was deeply connected to material life. It was not separate from grain, oil, cloth, labor, and management. The gods were honored through the same world that fed the people. And because Egypt was so long-lived, temples were often built, rebuilt, expanded, and adjusted across generations. A site could carry the marks of many rulers and many eras. Layers of stone and inscription accumulated slowly. This makes Egyptian sacred architecture feel like a conversation across time, rather than a single design. There is an almost meditative quality to this accumulation. One king adds a wall, another adds a courtyard, another restores a column, another inscribes a name. Over centuries, the temple becomes a memory in stone. Such places were often associated with the landscape around them. The river, the horizon, the desert edge, the rising sun, the turning sky, all could become part of a sacred setting. Egyptian religion did not float above geography. It lived inside it. Even a small shrine could make a corner of the world feel ordered and protected. A larger temple could anchor an entire district. The sound of feet on stone, the smell of incense, the glint of metal, the murmur of recitation, all would have contributed to an atmosphere of focused attention. And then, when the ritual ended, the world would return to itself gradually. The offerings would remain, the priests would continue, the sun would keep moving. Ancient Egypt understood that sacred life was not only about grand revelation, it was also about repetition, maintenance, and return. The same act, repeated faithfully, could help hold the world in place. Ancient Egypt was also a place of observation. In medicine, agriculture, mathematics, and administration, people needed to notice patterns. They watched bodies, seasons, measurements, and materials. Some Egyptian medical texts show an interest in symptoms, treatments, and procedures. They do not resemble modern medicine, of course, but they do reveal a practical curiosity about the body and how to care for it. Herbal remedies, bandaging, salves, and manual treatments were part of this world. The boundary between medical practice and magic could be fluid by modern standards, yet that does not make the approach unserious. People tried to help the body with the knowledge they had. They experimented, repeated, recorded, and adapted. This practical intelligence appears elsewhere as well. The Egyptians had to measure fields after flooding, manage storehouses, calculate labor, and track supplies. Mathematics served real purposes. Fractions, geometry, and counting were not abstract toys. They were tools of a managed civilization. Water management itself required understanding. Canals, basins, and irrigation systems supported agriculture in ways that demanded coordination. A river that gives life also needs human guidance. If water was too much or too little, the results could be serious. This is one more reason the Nile was so central to every level of society. It was not merely scenic, it was structural. The Egyptians also observed the heavens. Stars and celestial patterns helped with timekeeping and religious orientation. The night sky above the desert could be remarkably clear. It is not difficult to imagine people lying back and noticing the fixed brilliance of certain stars, the gradual changes of the seasons, and the dependable return of the sun. These observations may have shaped calendars and ritual timing. A civilization that depended on agriculture and ceremony needed reliable ways to mark the passage of time. So the sky became both a practical guide and a sacred one. It is pleasing in a quiet way to think of all these kinds of attention existing together. A physician tending a wound, a farmer estimating the flood, a scribe calculating grain, a priest studying the right hour for a rite, a builder aligning a wall, a night watcher noting the stars. Each person looks carefully at the world and the world answers in patterns. Ancient Egypt's record keeping helps us see this. It was a civilization that did not merely admire the world, it measured it. That measuring brought order, but it also brought continuity. A kingdom can remember itself only if someone writes things down, counts them, compares them, and passes the knowledge forward. And so the practical and the sacred often lived side by side. A remedy could be written on papyrus. A charm might accompany a treatment. A measurement might protect a harvest. A ritual might keep a boundary in place. Egypt's knowledge was integrated, layered, and deeply rooted in use. The result, from our vantage point, is a civilization that feels both ancient and strangely close. People who care for the body, the field, the household, and the calendar are never far from us. They just wear different names, different clothes, and different tools. In the hush of the night, that continuity can be very soothing. The same human desire to understand, to help, and to maintain has always been here, moving gently through time. Ancient Egypt was powerful at home, but it was never sealed away from the rest of the world. Trade brought materials, ideas, and people across borders. Egypt exchanged goods with neighboring lands and distant regions, depending on the era. Timber, metals, incense, oils, stones, and manufactured objects moved along routes that connected Egypt to the wider ancient world. Some imports were precious because they were rare in Egypt. Others mattered because they filled practical needs. The Nile itself helped make exchange possible, but so did overland routes and maritime travel. Boats could carry large loads efficiently, and coastal movement opened further connections. Egyptian shipping was therefore not only about domestic transport. It was part of a broader web of contact. Foreign lands also appeared in Egyptian art and texts, sometimes as allies, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as sources of tribute, sometimes as places of wonder. The image of the wider world in Egyptian sources could be sharp, formal, and political, but it also reveals curiosity. Egypt knew it was one land among many, even while it celebrated its own order. This is important because long-lived civilizations often become more complex at the edges than we imagine. They are not self-contained monuments. They are exchanges, negotiations, and adaptations. Egypt borrowed, absorbed, resisted, and transformed outside influences across many centuries. That long contact affected art, politics, religion, and daily goods. New materials could change craft. New allies could affect power. New peoples could enter the kingdom in different roles. Sometimes the border was a line of defense. Sometimes it was a zone of trade. Often it was both. The Egyptians were also attentive to neighboring peoples in ways that were shaped by their own worldview. They described others according to their own categories, which means we must read the sources carefully. Still, the record shows movement. No great ancient civilization lived entirely alone, and there is a quiet beauty in that fact. The river that made Egypt possible also connected it to distant places. A ship on the water, a caravan across the edge of the desert, a bundle of goods tied carefully with rope, all of these suggest a world in motion. Imagine a merchant waiting at a dock, checking a list, glancing at the sky, listening to the creak of wood and the splash of water. Imagine a pack animal moving under load, the track narrowing in the heat. Imagine a foreign object arriving in Egypt and being admired, copied, or repurposed by local craftsmen. The ancient world was full of such exchanges. Egypt's strength lay partly in its ability to absorb what came to it without losing its sense of itself. That balance is delicate. Too much openness can erode identity, too much closure can isolate. Egypt found ways over and over to remain itself while still participating in a larger ancient system. This too is a kind of endurance, not simply standing still but remaining coherent while the world moves around you. As the centuries passed, Egypt would meet new powers and new pressures, yet its older patterns left deep traces. The river remained, the writing remained, the memory of kingship remained. The afterlife remained, and the civilization continued to speak in one form or another long after its first great days had passed. When we think about ancient Egypt today, we usually think of what survived. That survival shapes our imagination more than anything else. Stone temples remain where mud brick neighborhoods vanished. Tombs endure where wooden homes disappeared. Painted coffins, jewelry, statues, papyri, and reliefs survived because they were buried, protected, or made from materials that last. The surviving record is extraordinary, but it is also selective. This means Egypt feels both familiar and incomplete. We know so much and yet not enough. We can read names and stories, but we do not know every conversation. We see the grand record of rulers and only glimpses of ordinary people. We can reconstruct a great deal, but a great deal remains softly out of reach. And perhaps that partial quality is part of the appeal. The gaps invite imagination, but not in a careless way. They invite patient thought. A fragment of pottery can suggest a household. A burial item can suggest belief. A record of grain can suggest a season. A temple wall can suggest a ceremony. Each surviving piece gives us a small window, and we learn to look through it carefully. Egypt also remains close because it offers so many forms of human continuity. People built families, they worked fields, they wrote letters, they worried about food, they honored the dead. They made art, they governed, they believed. These are not exotic impulses, they are familiar ones arranged in a different pattern of time. The civilization's visual style helps as well. Egyptian art is memorable at a glance. Its profiles, colors, symbols, and proportions stay with us. Its faces seem still but not empty. Its gods seem ancient but not cold. Its tomb scenes are full of movement if you look long enough. Carrying, offering, fishing, singing, grinding, weaving. Appears in repeated gestures. Even the silence of Egypt's ruins speaks. A colonnade in the heat, a painted chamber in shadow, a carved name worn by time, a statue broken but still dignified. These sights remind us that civilizations do not vanish all at once. They thin, transform, and leave traces. There is comfort in this strangely, not because loss is pleasant, but because endurance is real. Something can remain, a word can survive, a shape can persist, a story can be told again. Ancient Egypt has never stopped being studied, imagined, and visited. Archaeologists continue to work. Museums continue to preserve and interpret. New technologies reveal details once hidden in plain sight. And every generation discovers some fresh way to ask old questions about the river, the kings, the workers, the tombs, the gods, and the daily life that connected them all. So the civilization lives on in layers, in stone and papyrus, in scholarship and memory. In the shape of a pyramid against the sky, in a small amulet held between fingers, in a grainy inscription on a wall, in the quiet sense that people long ago once built a whole world beside a river and left enough behind for us to still feel their presence. That perhaps is one of the most amazing facts of all. Not that Egypt was grand though it was, not that it was old though it was, but that it still feels near enough to listen to when the night is calm and the mind is ready to wander slowly among its stones. And so we let the evening settle again. with the river moving quietly in the distance and the old land of Egypt resting beneath its long desert sky. We have passed through water and writing, homes and temples, craft and kingship, the labor behind monuments and the patient beliefs that helped a civilization hold itself together for so many centuries. The details are many, but they all point in the same gentle direction. People lived there. They noticed things. They kept records. They made beauty. They cared for one another. They prepared for what came next. Now there is nothing more that needs to be done. The facts can soften. The images can loosen and drift. A papyrus page, a painted wall, a line of reeds, a warm stone block, a loaf of bread, a boat on dark water, all can fade slowly into the background. If you are already growing sleepy, let that sleep come at its own pace. And if you are still awake for a little while, you can remain here as long as you like, in the calm after a long look at ancient Egypt, where even the oldest stones seem to breathe a little in the night. The Nile was never only a river. It was also a schedule, a memory, and a promise. It rose, withdrew, and rose again in a pattern that was steady enough to build a civilization around, yet never so simple that people could stop paying attention. In that way, life in Egypt remained quietly alive to the world around it. The sky, the water, the soil, the seasons, and the stars all mattered. Nothing was merely background. Everything could become a sign. It is easy to imagine ancient people as if they lived in darkness, but Egypt gives us the opposite feeling. It shows us a culture that observed constantly. The flooding of the Nile had to be watched, the land had to be measured, the heavens had to be studied, the dead had to be prepared for carefully. Even the smallest habits could carry meaning. A painted line, a folded cloth, a charm tucked into a burial, a shape on a wall, all of these belong to a larger way of understanding the world. That is one reason the civilization feels so enduring. It did not rely on one idea alone. It rested on many connected acts of attention. Farmers looked to the river, priests looked to the gods, scribes looked to the page, builders looked to the horizon, families looked to their ancestors. In this way, Egypt became a place where daily life and sacred life remained close together. Some of its most famous monuments seem to belong to a dream because they are so large and so old that the mind has to pause before accepting them. Yet they were made by ordinary hands over long spans of time, with methods that were careful rather than miraculous. Blocks were dragged, ramps may have been used, measurements were checked and checked again. Great monument often began as a very patient labor, repeated by many people in a rhythm that might have felt almost like breathing. And if the monuments are grand, the small objects are often just as moving. A comb, a spoon, a scarab amulet, a ceramic bowl, a wooden toy, a painted box. These items tell us that ancient Egypt was not made only of temples and tombs, but of households, children, meals, and private routines. Someone once touched them. Someone once set them down. Someone once needed them on a normal day. The more we learn, the more human the world becomes. A list of goods in a storeroom can reveal trade. A damaged wall can show repair. A discarded tool can point to work done before sunrise. A piece of jewelry can suggest affection, identity, or status. The ancient past is often carried forward by humble things. There is also something especially calm about the geography of Egypt. The river valley, narrow and green, lies between wide desert spaces. This contrast gives the land a stillness that is almost visual music. The black soil and the pale sand, the reeds and the stone, the bright water and the open sky. When ancient Egyptians moved through this landscape, they were moving through a world of strong edges and soft transitions. The desert itself held a strange double character. It could be inhospitable, yet it also protected. It could separate communities, yet it could preserve them. Its dryness helped keep papyrus, textiles, wood, and even food remnants from decaying as quickly as they might elsewhere. Many of the things we know now survive because the climate was kind to memory, even if it was not always kind to life. That preservation gives Egypt its special place in the imagination. Other ancient civilizations left deep traces too. But Egypt often feels more visible because so much survived in a recognizable form. Walls still stand. Colors remain in sheltered places. Names are carved into stone. Whole burial chambers were sealed away and then reopened centuries later. The result is a landscape where the past seems less vanished than merely waiting, and yet mystery still fills the gaps. We do not know every detail of how some monuments were built. We cannot always hear the exact tone of a prayer or recover the full meaning of a ceremony. We may know the shape of a ritual, but not the private emotion inside it. We can read a text and still wonder what it felt like to be the person who wrote it. That uncertainty is part of the beauty. It keeps the past soft around the edges. Egyptian religion had many layers, and it changed over time as living traditions do. Gods were local and universal at once. Some were tied to the sun, the moon, fertility, protection, the underworld, or kingship. Others were connected to animals, crafting, magic, or healing. It was a world where divine power could be imagined in many forms, from a falcon in the sky to a lioness in the heat to a small protective figure worn close to the body. There is comfort in how practical much of this religion seems. It was not only about distant heaven, it was about order, balance, preservation, the idea that the world should remain recognizable, that the sun should rise, that the dead should be remembered, that names should not be forgotten. In this sense, religion helped structure both the visible world and the invisible one. The concept of the afterlife was especially important, and it gave Egyptian burial customs their remarkable complexity. The body was prepared with great care, not because death was denied, but because it was acknowledged as a transition. Tombs could contain furniture, food, amulets, cosmetics, tools, and texts. These were not just decorations. They were provisions for a journey and also expressions of love, duty, and hope. A tomb was not a simple endpoint. It was a carefully made environment where memory could continue. Some were plain, some were richly decorated, some were hidden, some were meant to be seen by many. The contrast between public monuments and private burial spaces tells us that the Egyptians understood both visibility and concealment. Some things were for the living, some things were for eternity. Some things belonged only to the quiet dark. The written language of Egypt adds another layer of wonder. Hieroglyphs are beautiful in the way a riverbank full of reeds is beautiful, or a constellation is beautiful. They are signs that carry sound, image, and meaning together. They were used on temple walls, tombs, monuments, and in other formal settings, while other scripts served everyday administrative needs. Writing was not a decorative extra. It was a working part of government, religion, commerce, and remembrance. Scribes held a special position because literacy itself was valuable. To write was to preserve, to record was to stabilize. A tally of goods, a legal agreement, a letter from one person to another, all of these helped a large society stay connected. Even a simple note could travel farther than a voice. A message written on papyrus could survive where speech vanished. Papyrus itself was a quiet marvel. Made from a marsh plant that grew near the Nile, it became one of Egypt's most important materials. The same river that nourished crops also supported writing. In a way, the land gave people both bread and memory. That seems fitting for a civilization so attentive to continuity. One of the most intimate ways we encounter ancient Egypt is through the lives of workers. Not the legendary kings, but the artisans, masons, potters, weavers, and laborers whose hands shaped the world. Their names are not always preserved, but their work is. A polished surface, a painted scene, a fitted joint in stone, a carefully aligned column all speak of skill and repetition. Monumental architecture becomes less distant when we imagine the daily endurance it required. There were villages of workers, too, where people lived in organized communities while constructing royal projects. They had homes, meals, disputes, celebrations, and routine concerns. They wrote letters. They dealt with shortages. They took pride in their craft. They were not invisible to themselves, even if history sometimes made them hard to see. Ancient life, when viewed closely, is always fuller than the grand summary. In many tomb paintings and reliefs, the everyday world appears in quiet detail. Farmers bring grain, fishermen cast nets, musicians play, bakers knead dough, servants carry jars, offerings are arranged with care. These scenes are not random decoration. They are an image of an ordered life, where abundance is shown through repetition and harmony. It is one of the most gentle visual languages ever made. Egyptian art follows conventions that might seem rigid at first glance, but those conventions served a purpose. They created clarity. The body is often shown in parts that reveal what matters most: the eye from the front, the face in profile, the shoulders broad, the feet side by side. The result is not realism in the modern sense, but recognition. The figure remains legible across time. And because the style is so distinct, it lets us recognize Egypt at once, even in fragments. A painted lotus, a blue-green faience object, a curved wig, a seated scribe, a winged symbol, a ring of carved signs. The civilization developed an aesthetic vocabulary that is instantly itself, yet still adaptable over centuries. There is a kind of serenity in such consistency. Still, Egypt was never frozen. It changed through dynasties, foreign contact, internal shifts, and long stretches of continuity mixed with disruption. New rulers arrived, old forms were revived, temples were expanded. Cities rose and fell, trade networks changed, beliefs evolved. The land remained, but the people in it were always moving through time. That long duration is part of why Egypt can feel like many civilizations braided together. Early kingdoms, imperial periods, religious reforms, foreign occupations, and later cultural blends all belong to the same broad story. The name Ancient Egypt hides many separate centuries, and each one had its own flavor. Some eras were stable, some were tense. Some were brilliant, some were fragile. Real history is rarely smooth. Among the most fascinating things about Egypt is how often later cultures return to it. Greeks admired it. Romans collected its art, medieval travelers wrote about it, modern archaeologists excavated it, writers and painters reinvented it, filmmakers, game designers, and novelists continue to borrow from it. That reuse sometimes distorts the original world, but it also shows how strongly the civilization still works on the imagination. Perhaps this is because Egypt offers both clarity and mystery. Its forms are recognizable, yet their meanings are never entirely exhausted. A cat-headed goddess can be familiar and still strange. A burial text can be studied and still feel deep. A temple can be mapped and still seem alive in the shadows. The culture is full of surfaces that invite attention and depths that never quite close. Even the animals of Egypt occupy a special place in its atmosphere. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, falcons, cows, jackals, and scarabs all appear in religious and artistic contexts. These were not only creatures of the landscape, they became symbols, companions, warnings, and bridges between worlds. A cat in the house, a bird over water, a beetle moving across sand, all could suggest something larger than themselves. In the Egyptian mind, nature and meaning were often close neighbors. The scarab is especially memorable. A small dung beetle rolling a ball across the ground became associated with renewal and the sun's daily movement. It is a striking example of how ancient thought could transform a simple observation into a cosmic image. The world was watched carefully enough that even a small insect could become a symbol of creation. The solar cycle itself must have been a source of endless reflection. Dawn arriving over the horizon, noon at its height, sunset descending into the west, darkness giving way to stars. In a land so open and luminous, the sun could hardly be ignored. Many Egyptian ideas about kingship, order, and divine power are tied to light, travel, and rebirth. The sky was not empty. It was a great moving field of significance. The stars, too, mattered. Their patterns helped with timekeeping and navigation. Their rising and setting could mark seasons and hours. The night sky over Egypt would have been especially compelling in places where darkness opened wide above the desert. One can imagine the quiet of looking upward from a riverbank, with the world around you almost still, and the heavens slowly turning. Calendars and timing were not abstract matters. They affected agriculture, ritual, and administration. Knowing when the Nile would rise helped determine when to prepare fields. Knowing when a festival should occur helped unite religious life with political life. Ancient Egypt was, in this sense, a civilization built on precision as much as reverence. It needed timing to survive. Medicine and practical knowledge also belonged to this world. Ancient texts and archaeological remains suggest that people observed the body closely, treated injuries, used remedies, and combined empirical experience with spiritual ideas. The ancient healer stood at a crossroads of knowledge. A broken bone, a fever, a wound, a pain in the stomach, each would have called for attention. Life was vulnerable, and so the desire to heal became a serious craft. That vulnerability appears often if we look beneath the monumental surface. Children died, droughts could come. Political upheaval could unsettle communities. Disease was real. Work was physically demanding. Even in a highly organized civilization, life remained fragile. This does not diminish Egypt's achievements, it deepens them. The beauty of the monuments becomes more meaningful when we remember the uncertainty behind them. The same is true of family life. Marriage, children, household labor, inheritance, care for elders, these form the ordinary fabric of existence. Love may not always be recorded in the ways modern readers expect, but it is visible in many traces, in burial arrangements, in letters, in domestic goods, in the care taken with names and memory. The ancients were not detached from affection. They simply expressed it in forms shaped by their time. Some personal texts are especially moving because they preserve a voice across distance. A complaint, a request, a greeting, a reminder, a lament, a practical note. Such writing lets us hear a person not as an emblem but as an individual. The tone may be brisk or tender, irritated or careful. We learn that the ancient world was full of moods. It was not only ceremonial, it was lived, and there is something almost knightly about all this attention to the past. The day settles, thoughts slow, big ideas become softer. Ancient Egypt, with its long history and layered meanings, suits this hour well. It asks us to look without rushing, to notice a fragment, to consider a name, to imagine a river at dawn, to let a chamber, a jar, a temple, a star stay in the mind just a little longer. The temples themselves can feel like slow music made of stone. Columns rise like planted groves. Walls enclose sacred order. Doorways guide movement from brightness to shadow. Reliefs repeat divine scenes with intentional rhythm. A temple was not merely a building. It was a structured relationship between humans and powers beyond them. The architecture shaped both movement and thought. In some temple spaces, the carvings were painted with vivid color. Blue, red, green, gold, and black would have brought the stone to life. What we often see now as pale and weathered was once bright and animated. This can be surprising because the ancient world in modern memory often seems monochrome. But Egypt was not a grey civilization. It was full of color, and color was meaningful. Even funerary objects, which modern audiences sometimes regard as solemn or sad, were often designed with warmth and care. The desire was not only to mark death but to support continuation. Perfumed oils, jewelry, food offerings, Shapti figures, folded cloth, painted coffins, these all belong to the tender logic of accompaniment. Someone should not have to cross into the unknown empty-handed. The written book of the dead, with its spells and instructions, reflects this attitude. It was not a single fixed book in the modern sense, but a tradition of texts used to guide the dead through dangers, judgments, and transformations. Its language blends anxiety and hope. There are gates to pass, tests to survive, and deities to address. The journey of the soul becomes a patterned passage rather than a complete disappearance. This attention to the afterlife may sound distant from ordinary life, yet in a sense it made daily life more solemn and deliberate. If the dead continued in some form, then names mattered, behavior mattered, offerings mattered, memory mattered. Such beliefs encouraged people to think across time, not just across the immediate day. Egyptian kingship also depended on this same long view. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler in the modern political sense. He or she was linked to the maintenance of order, to divine legitimacy, and to the continuity of the land. Royal monuments announced stability. Administrative systems supported it. Ceremonies reinforced it. At its best, kingship was imagined as a kind of stewardship over cosmic balance. Of course, power could be harsh, dynasties could be ambitious, bureaucracies could be demanding, monumental building required labor, political succession could be uncertain. Egypt's long history includes conflict as well as harmony, but even those tensions are part of why the civilization feels real. It was not a perfect dreamland. It was a durable human society with all the burdens that implies. When we speak of ancient Egypt, we are really speaking about a great river civilization that stretched across time and changed shape while keeping some deep continuities. Its people learned to live with cycles, floods and droughts, growth and decay, visibility and burial, speech and silence. This balance may be one reason it still feels spiritually resonant. There is also a particular dignity in the Egyptian approach to the body. Through mummification and funerary art, the body was treated not as insignificant, but as meaningful. Preservation was a form of respect. Care of the dead became an act of civilization. The body was not seen as a trivial shell, but as part of a larger identity that deserved protection and remembrance. This reverence extended to images as well. A statue was not only a likeness, it could serve as a vessel of presence. A name carved in stone could help preserve a person's continuity. A painted face on a coffin could help the dead be recognized in the next world. In this culture, representation was never merely decorative. It was participatory. So many of the objects that remain today were made to do more than be looked at. They were made to hold a role in a system of belief. That gives them a strange intimacy now. We stand before them in museums or at ruined sites knowing that they once had duties. A jar held offerings. A seal guarded property. A statue received attention. A tomb wall served memory. Their silence is active. If you think of the Egyptians at work along the river, the scene becomes especially peaceful. Early light over water, workers bending to tasks, boats gliding past, birds shifting in the reeds, smoke rising thinly from cooking fires. The day beginning with purpose but not hurry. Life in the valley could be demanding, yet the rhythm of the landscape offered a kind of quiet order. Trade widened that order. Egypt was not sealed away. It exchanged goods and ideas with Nubia, the Levant, the Mediterranean world, and other neighboring regions. Timber, metals, oils, lapis lazuli, incense, and other materials moved through networks that connected distant places. Ancient Egypt was locally rooted and far-reaching at once. Its river gave it identity, but its horizons extended beyond the riverbanks. These connections helped shape art, politics, and religion over time. Foreign objects could inspire local forms. Imported materials could become sacred offerings or royal luxuries. Diplomacy could coexist with rivalry. The world was already interlinked in ways that feel surprisingly modern, though the pace was slower and the scale more intimate. At the same time, the Egyptian core remained recognizably itself. The land's geography anchored the culture. The river continued to define settlement. The desert continued to define limits. The sun continued to define ritual and imagery. Even when rulers changed, the long habits of the land held. That is perhaps why archaeology there never feels finished. A hidden chamber, a painted coffin, a settlement layer, a ship fragment, a broken seal, a piece of jewelry, all can slightly adjust the picture. Each discovery is a small lamp in a very old room. The room was never empty. We are just still learning how to see it, and there is always more to imagine beyond what the objects can tell us. The sound of sandals on stone, the scent of oil and dust, the heat in a courtyard at midday, the hush inside a tomb entrance, the low murmur of prayers. The splash of water being carried from the Nile, the crackle of papyrus, the metallic glint of a tool, the sleepy breathing of a child at dusk. These are ordinary possibilities, yet they help the past feel inhabited. In a bedtime mood, these details matter gently. They do not demand attention. They simply rest there, quiet and watchful, like painted figures in a chamber where lamps once burned low. Ancient Egypt can be understood through chronology and analysis, but it can also be felt through atmosphere. The stone keeps its cool, the river keeps its movement, the desert keeps its hush. And so the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and the later centuries all seem to settle into a long layered sleep. Different names, different rulers, different temples, different cities, yet all under the same broad sky. The pattern is not a straight line. It is more like a braid or a series of reflections in moving water. Some of the city names survive only in fragments now. Some places have been buried, eroded, or built over, yet their outlines can still be sensed. A port that once welcomed ships, a capital where officials counted grain, a necropolis where the dead were carefully arranged, a sanctuary deep in the desert, a workmen's settlement near a royal tomb. The map of ancient Egypt is partly visible and partly hidden, which makes it feel softly infinite. The myths, too, belong to this atmosphere. Osiris, Isis, Horus, Ra, Thoth, Anubis, Hathor, and many others form a landscape of stories about death, healing, kingship, wisdom, protection, and transformation. These myths were not fixed ornaments. They were living explanations, poetic and practical at once. Through them, Egyptians thought about the daily mystery of being alive in a world that always changed. And because myths often survive in fragments and variations, they invite reflection without closing it. One story may emphasize one trait, another. A god may be local in one place and universal in another. This flexibility allowed belief to move with time. It also makes the mythic world feel like a shoreline, with waves revisiting the same stones in different patterns. The same is true of the monumental script and imagery. A tomb scene may be formal, yet it contains traces of humor, tenderness, and ambition. A royal inscription may be proud, yet it also reveals anxiety about legitimacy and memory. A prayer may sound stable, yet it comes from a person facing uncertainty. The old world is rarely simple when examined closely. As night deepens, it becomes easier to appreciate these subtleties without needing to solve them. Not every mystery must be answered tonight. Some can remain as they are, a sealed chamber. A missing name, a partially read line, a forgotten town, a ritual only half understood. The unknown can be peaceful when it is not threatening. Ancient Egypt offers that kind of peace because it balances familiarity and remoteness so well. We know enough to imagine the lives there, but not so much that the imagination has nowhere to go. The space between fact and silence is wide enough for contemplation. In that space, the river moves, the stars turn, and the old stones wait patiently. If you listen in that quiet space, you might think of a scribe late at night, finishing a line by lamplight, or a potter's wheel slowing, or a temple courtyard after the crowds have gone, or a boat tied at the bank rocking gently, or a household settling into sleep while the desert cools around it. These are small scenes, yet they keep the civilization near, and perhaps that is the most enduring fact of all. Not merely that Egypt built magnificence, but that it made a world in which memory mattered enough to be protected with stone, language, ritual, and art. It trusted continuity, it trusted form, it trusted that names could last. So we let the details grow softer now. The papyrus dries into memory, the blue glaze dims, the painted line fades to outline, the river becomes a glimmer, the temple becomes shadow, the desert becomes a wide, quiet field under stars. Ancient Egypt remains in that gentle way, a civilization that does not hurry us. It waits. It invites notice. It offers its old facts like smooth stones held briefly in the palm. And then when the mind is ready, it lets them go. The night is still here. The water is still moving somewhere beyond the dark. The old land rests beneath its long sky. And the story can rest too, without ending too quickly, simply drifting a little farther into silence, where the last lamps are low, the air is warm, and all the centuries seem to breathe as one. Beyond the great names and the famous monuments, there is also the quieter Egypt of ordinary days, and that Egypt is often the one that feels closest. A village on the riverbank, a courtyard with a shaded wall, a basket of fish, a measure of barley, a child learning the shape of letters, a woman grinding grain, a man repairing a net. These details do not always appear in the grandest inscriptions, but they are part of the same ancient rhythm. Civilization, after all, is made not only of kings and temples, but also of repetition, patience, and care. The Nile made this ordinary life possible in a way that still feels remarkable. Every year in much of ancient Egypt, the river rose and spread rich silt across the fields, and then receded, leaving the earth ready for planting. It was not always gentle, because nature is never entirely tame, but it was dependable enough to create a sense of order. In a desert world, this dependable renewal must have felt almost like a promise. The land darkened with moisture, green shoots appeared, and the cycle began again. To live beside such a river was to live beside a lesson in return and renewal. It is easy to imagine how closely people observed the water. The height of the inundation mattered to fields, to storage, to food, and to the mood of the year. Even the measuring of the flood became a quiet form of knowledge. Nile levels were watched with practical attention, and those observations carried both economic and symbolic weight. The river was not simply scenery, it was a living clock. It told the time of sowing, of harvesting, of waiting, of preparing. It linked the heavens, the land, and the labor of human hands. And so the people of ancient Egypt learned to think in cycles. The sun rose and set. The seasons returned. The moon waxed and waned. The river came and went. Life itself, in its broadest form, could be imagined as a sequence of recurring transformations rather than a single straight line. This may be one reason Egyptian thought gives such careful attention to rebirth, renewal, preservation, and continuity. What is repeated can be trusted more than what is fleeting. What returns can become sacred. This sense of return also appears in the way Egyptian art often arranges figures and symbols with steady balance. The body is shown in a composed, recognizable form. The eye is clear, the shoulders are broad, the profile is deliberate. It can feel formal at first, but formal does not mean lifeless. Instead, it creates a stable space in which meanings can endure. The image stays where the wind cannot easily take it. A face painted onto a coffin, a scene carved into a wall, a name written in a cartouche, all continue a conversation across centuries. Sometimes a single object can carry that continuity in a very tender way. A wooden figure placed inside a tomb, a comb, a cosmetic spoon shaped like a floating woman, a ring, a bead of faience, a small amulet worn for protection. These are not grand, yet they are deeply human. They suggest touch, habit, and affection. They tell us that ancient people loved beauty in familiar forms, and that they often sought to surround themselves with signs of safety and blessing. The smallest object can preserve the atmosphere of a life as surely as a monument preserves the name of a ruler. The amulets of ancient Egypt are especially suggestive because they stand at the meeting point of belief and daily concern. A symbol of the eye for protection, a scarab for renewal, a knot for life and power, a pillar for stability. These objects were often small enough to fit in the palm, yet they carried a world of meaning. They may have been chosen with care, tied with thread, placed among linens, or tucked close to the body. In a culture that understood danger and uncertainty, such things offered a quiet reassurance. They turned abstract hope into something tangible. The scarab in particular has a remarkable calmness about it. A simple beetle moving over the earth became linked with the rising sun and the idea of becoming again. There is something almost peaceful in that association. A creature that seems to labor silently across the ground becomes a sign of cosmic movement. This is one of the great beauties of ancient symbolism. The ordinary world is never merely ordinary. A small insect, a feather, a reed, a river, a horizon line, all can be transformed into language for life and death and the distance between them. The Egyptians seem to have been deeply aware that life was temporary, and yet they did not respond to this fact with despair. Instead, they built around it. They wrapped it. They named it. They fed it with ritual. They imagined the afterlife not as a vague forgetting, but as a landscape with fields, gates, guardians, offerings, dangers, and possibilities. The dead were not simply gone, they were transferred into a different relation with time. This is perhaps why their tombs feel less like endings than like careful continuations. Some tombs were painted with scenes of family life, work, hunting, feasting, and offering. These images are often beautiful in their stillness. A man leans forward to present incense. A woman smells a lotus. Servants bring food, birds lift from reeds, fish ripple in water, cattle graze, boats glide under a pale sky. None of this is frantic. It is a preserved moment held in a kind of timeless courtesy. The living hoped to sustain the dead with these images, but they also preserved their own world in the process. They left behind a vision of daily happiness as something worthy of remembrance. And yet the ancient Egyptian world was never only bright and orderly. It also knew illness, loss, labor, and political uncertainty. Dynasties rose and fell, borders changed, foreign rulers arrived, capitals shifted. Some periods were stable and prosperous, others fragmented and anxious. The old civilization lasted so long that its own history included many histories. That is one of its quiet marvels. It was not one static culture, but a succession of cultures that shared language, ritual, style, and memory while changing across time. This long duration gives Egypt a special depth. We can think of the early dynastic period, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and later eras that included foreign influences and renewed traditions. Each phase has its own atmosphere. The age of the pyramids feels different from the age of the great temple cities. The Middle Kingdom has a certain introspective refinement. The New Kingdom, with its imperial reach and famous rulers, carries a broader horizon. Later periods preserve older forms while absorbing new ideas. The result is not a single frozen image, but a slow, layered unfolding. The pyramids themselves belong to this layering. They seem so complete from a distance, yet they are the result of an immense number of individual acts. Stone by stone, ramp by ramp, line by line, weight balanced against weight. There is something soothing in imagining the scale of coordination required. The builders were not magicians, though the monuments can still feel magical. They were workers, planners, surveyors, administrators, masons, and transporters. The grandeur came from organization. The miracle was collective effort shaped over time. And the workers who lived near royal tomb projects formed communities of their own. At places such as Deir el-Medina, we can see evidence of families, work schedules, disputes, repairs, personal beliefs, and domestic life. This makes the ancient world feel wonderfully specific. These were not anonymous hands in the abstract. They were people with names, complaints, friendships, hopes, and routines. They wrote letters, they offered prayers, they decorated their homes, they made jokes, they asked for protection from the gods. In their own quiet way, they were as fully human as anyone. Even the concept of a tomb village carries a kind of hush. A community built near the place of royal burial, oriented around a sacred and practical task, must have had its own intimate atmosphere. The walls, the paths, the tools, the bread-making, the pottery, the workmen's records, all suggest a life lived in close relation to death without being overwhelmed by it. Perhaps that is another reason the ancient Egyptian imagination remains so compelling. It does not deny mortality, but it does not allow mortality to erase the texture of everyday living. The temples, too, are more than ruins of stone. They once held procession routes offering tables, sacred lakes, storerooms, sanctuaries, and the solemn routines of priests. A temple in ancient Egypt was not simply a place for a crowd to gather. It was a carefully ordered house for a god, maintained through ritual, cleanliness, music, food, and sacred language. The divine presence was treated with hospitality. Incense drifted, lamps glowed, doors were opened and closed according to custom. The ordinary architecture of the temple expressed the idea that the cosmos itself required tending. This is a beautiful thought and a quiet one. The universe was not taken for granted, it was maintained. The movement of stars, the cycles of the sun, the fertility of the land, the legitimacy of kingship, the protection of the dead, all belonged within a larger sense of balance. In ancient Egyptian thought, this balance is often associated with Ma'at, a concept that can mean truth, justice, order, and rightness, though no single English word captures it fully. Ma'at was not just a law written in the abstract. It was the alignment of things as they should be. A stable society, a truthful word, a just ruler, a proper offering, all participated in it. Because of this, the idea of disorder had a special weight. It was not merely inconvenience, it was a disturbance in the proper relation of things. Yet even this understanding did not make the world feel bleak. Instead, it made every act of care significant. To speak truthfully, to weigh grain honestly, to pour a libation, to honor ancestors, to name a god properly, to maintain a boundary stone, these were all ways of helping the world remain intelligible. Small acts became part of a cosmic maintenance. There is a certain tenderness in the fact that many ancient Egyptian texts are practical as well as sacred. Medical papyri preserve remedies, observations, and attempts to understand the body. Mathematical texts show calculation and geometry. Administrative documents record deliveries, labor, and accounts. Personal letters reveal affection, annoyance, requests, and concern. The civilization is often remembered for its tombs, but it was also a civilization of paperwork, medicine, measurement, and administration. These quieter records bring it close. They show minds at work in daily life. A medical text from the ancient world can feel especially human because it reflects both confidence and uncertainty. Some treatments are familiar to modern eyes, others are strange, and many combine observation with ritual. This mixture is not a flaw so much as a window into a different way of understanding the body. The healer might rely on herbs, honey, bandages, incantations, and careful attention to symptoms. In the candlelit world of antiquity, healing was never fully separated from sacred meaning. To care for a wound was also to acknowledge vulnerability. The scribes who preserved so much of this knowledge occupy a special place in the Egyptian imagination. Writing itself was a powerful art, not merely a convenience. To inscribe was to make something durable. Scribes were trained from a young age, and their craft depended on patience, memory, and precision. They sat cross-legged with palettes and reed pens. They copied texts, drafted letters, recorded inventories, and shaped official life. In many societies, writing tends to feel almost invisible because it becomes ordinary. In ancient Egypt, it was visibly precious. The very act of putting a word into form carried dignity, and the script, of course, was beautiful. Hieroglyphs may look like pictures to a modern observer, but they were a sophisticated writing system with multiple functions. Some signs represented sounds, others ideas, and still others served as determinatives to guide meaning. This made the written language both exact and poetic. A phrase could be informative and visually elegant at once. On stone, on papyrus, on wood, and on ceramic fragments, the written line becomes part of the architecture of memory. There is something almost restful in imagining a scribe adjusting a reed pen, moistening the tip, and shaping a line carefully on a sheet of papyrus. Outside, the day may be bright and hot. Inside, the room is shaded and still. The sound of papyrus fibers, the dry rasp of reed, the quiet concentration of a trained hand, all suggest a world that values slowness. Perhaps that is another gift of the ancient record. It reveals a civilization in which time could be formal, deliberate, and patient. The same patience appears in monumental carving. A relief scene on a temple wall might take shape over long stretches of work, with artisans tracing, correcting, polishing, and painting. Colors would once have been vivid. Reds, blues, greens, yellows, blacks, and whites animated the surfaces. Today we often see only traces, but the original effect must have been rich and balanced. Stone was not allowed to remain merely stone. It was made into a surface for memory and ritual. And because so much of the ancient color has faded, the imagination gently restores it. The mind fills the temple court with painted columns. It sees the river in bright morning light. It imagines linen reflecting the sun. It sees the blue of faience, the gold of metal, the deep brown of wood, and the polished gleam of black granite. The old world comes back not in full certainty, but in soft outline which can be more moving than completeness. There is also a special quiet around the objects found in tombs. A chair, a game board, a necklace, a folded cloth, a pair of sandals, a box of cosmetics, a model boat, a loaf of bread placed as offering. These items tell us that the Egyptians did not imagine eternity as an abstract void. They imagined continuity with form, comfort, and familiar material things. The afterlife was not a collapse of identity, but a continuation of personhood in a transformed state. This may be one reason their burial customs are so elaborate. They were preparing for a life that still required recognition, nourishment, and order. Mummification, though often discussed with fascination, was fundamentally part of this effort to preserve identity. The body was treated with ritual care because it was connected to the person's ongoing existence. To modern eyes, this can feel distant, but its underlying concern is tender. It asks, how do we protect what matters against time? How do we keep a name, a face, and a self from dissolving entirely? The answer offered by ancient Egypt involved skill, incense, linen, resin, prayer, and the belief that preservation itself could be sacred. The canopic jars used to hold organs during burial are another example of that careful attention. Their lids could bear the heads of protective deities, linking bodily preservation to divine guardianship. Even in this practical context, imagery and belief remain intertwined. The jars were not mere containers. They were part of a larger language of safekeeping. Every element, from wrapping to inscription, participated in the wish that the dead might remain intact for the journey beyond. This journey in the Egyptian imagination involved judgment, encounter, and transformation. The Book of the Dead, a modern title for a collection of funerary spells and texts, is not a single book but a flexible body of guidance. Its spells were intended to help the deceased navigate the afterlife, speak the proper words, avoid dangers, and join the blessed dead. The tone is often practical rather than sensational. It is as if the soul were preparing for a passage through unknown country with a carefully packed set of instructions. There is something deeply human in that. Among the most evocative images is the weighing of the heart, where the heart of the deceased is balanced against the feather of Maat. The scene combines ethical meaning with visual calm. It is not noisy or dramatic in the modern sense. It is measured. The heart, seat of memory and character, is tested against truth. The idea that a life can be weighed with such precision gives the afterlife a solemn dignity. It also reflects the ancient conviction that the moral life and cosmic order belong together. The gods who attend these stories are often associated with very specific domains, yet they also overlap in ways that feel fluid and poetic. Thoth with writing and wisdom, Hathor with joy, music, beauty, and maternal care, Anubis with embalming and the protection of the dead, Ra with solar power and daily renewal, Isis with magical protection and devotion, Osiris with kingship, death, and rebirth, Horus with rightful rule and the living king. Their stories changed over time, but the broad pattern remained a map of existential concerns. The gods were not distant abstractions only, they were ways of naming forces that people could feel in the world. Some deities were shown in animal form or human form with animal features, and this too adds to the old atmosphere. A falcon's gaze, a jackal's watchfulness, a cow's calm nourishment, a ibis's long curved beak, a cat's alert grace, an ape's intelligence. These forms did not reduce the gods to animals. Rather, they acknowledged that life is shared across species, and that certain qualities seem to move between human beings and the natural world. The animal forms are one more reminder that ancient Egyptian religion was rooted in observation as well as imagination. The domestic cat, which later became so beloved in Egyptian life and art, carries a particularly gentle presence. It is easy to picture a cat resting in a shaded corner, watching the movements of a household with serene independence. In time, cats became associated with protection and with divine imagery, especially through Bastet. Yet even outside formal symbolism, the cat itself must have been a calming companion in a warm climate, a creature of soft shadow and quiet vigilance. Small life and sacred life often stood near each other. Birds, too, were everywhere in the Egyptian landscape and imagination. Herons, ibises, falcons, geese, ducks, and many others animated the marshes and skies. A marsh is an especially evocative place because it represents abundance, concealment, and renewal. Reeds sway, water reflects light, birds rise from hidden channels, fish move beneath the surface. The marsh appears in tomb scenes and myths alike as a space of life emerging from watery uncertainty. It is a borderland, and borderlands are always rich in meaning. Desert and marsh together create one of the most distinctive atmospheres in the ancient world. The desert stands still, dry, and immense. The marsh shifts, glistens, and rustles. Between them lies the cultivated land where villages, fields, and cities could thrive. This contrast shaped Egyptian thought in deep ways. Safety and danger, fertility and barrenness, order and wildness, all were visible in the landscape itself. A civilization built in such a setting would naturally learn to value balance and to respect limits. There is beauty in the Egyptian relationship to borders. The edge of the floodplain, the boundary of a field, the threshold of a temple, the doorway of a tomb, the horizon line where earth meets sky, all seem to invite contemplation. Borders are not only separations, they are places of passage. The sun crosses the horizon. The dead cross into another realm. Processions move between inner sanctuary and outer court. Boats move along the river from one bank to another. Movement through boundaries is one of the civilization's central patterns. This may be why boats appear so often in Egyptian imagery. On the practical level, the river was a highway, and boats were essential for transport, fishing, travel, and communication. On the symbolic level, boats carried gods, kings, and souls across the waters of existence. The solar bark, moving with the sun across the sky and through the underworld, is one of the great images of cosmic passage. The idea is at once grand and intimate. Every journey on water, however small, echoes a larger voyage. A quiet boat on the Nile at dusk may have held all of this at once: trade, travel, prayer, and reflection. The water darkens, the shoreline softens, birds settle into reeds, a breeze touches the surface, the oars move with gentle rhythm. If one were standing on the bank, it might feel as though time itself had slowed down. Such moments help explain why a river civilization can become a spiritual one. The river teaches passage, but it also teaches patience. The Egyptian language of eternity did not erase earthly feeling. Love letters, hymns, lamentations, and prayers all preserve human emotion. A person could miss someone, a family could mourn, a child could be cherished, a god could be addressed with hope and trust. These voices prevent the ancient world from becoming purely monumental. They keep it alive and tender. In the dim light of study, one begins to hear not only an empire, but a household, not only a kingdom, but a room where someone waits for another to return. It is also worth remembering how much remains unfinished in our knowledge. Many sites have not been fully excavated. Many texts remain damaged or only partly understood. Many artifacts have lost their original context. We can describe an object, but not always the exact hand that made it or the exact ritual that used it. In some cases, the gaps are small, in others they are wide. Yet these gaps do not diminish the past, they preserve its depth. A civilization that could be fully exhausted by explanation would lose some of its atmosphere. Ancient Egypt, by contrast, continues to breathe through uncertainty. A fragment of wall painting, a broken stela, a burial shaft, a field note from an excavation. a name listed in a king's record, a scarab seal with worn edges. Each piece suggests a larger arrangement, but never quite completes it. The mind moves gently among them, like someone walking through a garden at dusk, noticing the shapes of trees and stones without needing to count every leaf. Even the famous discoveries retain this quality when considered slowly. The tomb of Tutankhamun, for example, is often remembered for its treasures, but beneath that excitement lies another atmosphere entirely. A young king, a burial preserved almost intact by accident, and the extraordinary range of objects arranged for his journey. Chariots, jewelry, furniture, masks, shrines, and everyday items all resting together in layered silence. The tomb became famous not because it was the most complete expression of Egypt, but because it let the modern world glimpse a preserved moment in a hidden chamber. And beyond that one tomb lies the broader, older pattern, countless burials, some richly furnished, some modest, each one reflecting a social world of custom and hope. The rich and the powerful had more elaborate preparations, but the underlying desire to be remembered and protected belonged to many. The dead were not simply disposed of. They were cared for, addressed, and integrated into the moral imagination of the living. Ancestors mattered, memory mattered, continuity mattered. This continuity extended into the everyday calendar of festivals and sacred occasions. At different times of year, processions would move, offerings would be made, and particular gods would be honored. Festivals connected communities to their temples and to the mythic calendar. They offered moments of collective rhythm, sound, and color. Yet even these public events were structured by restraint. Ceremony in ancient Egypt often feels deliberate rather than exuberant, though joy certainly has its place in it. Music, perfume, flowers, and food would all have contributed to a sense of sanctioned celebration. Music itself is an interesting and often overlooked part of the ancient atmosphere. Harps, flutes, drums, lutes, clappers, and singing all appear in imagery and textual references. Music carries time in a different way than stone does. It disappears as soon as it is made, and that may be part of its sacred power. A hymn rises and falls. A chant echoes and fades. The sound touches the air and then leaves it changed. In a temple or a banquet hall or a private house, music would have woven together emotion and memory with unusual delicacy. Perfume and incense played a similar role. They marked sacred spaces, honored the divine, and softened the air. In a hot climate, fragrance would have been especially meaningful. Myrrh, frankincense, oils, resins, and ointments transformed the sensory world. One can imagine a temple sanctuary filled with a faint sweetness, or a funeral ritual surrounded by smoke and scent. Smell is one of the most intimate senses, and it often carries memory more powerfully than sight. The ancient world, through incense and oils, knew this well. Another quiet fact worth lingering on is the role of color and material in Egyptian art and craftsmanship. Gold was not merely valuable because it was scarce. It was meaningful because of its association with the sun, endurance, and brilliance. Lapis lazuli, imported from distant regions, suggested depth and the night sky. Turquoise and carnelian brought earth and horizon into ornament. Wood, stone, faience, ivory, linen, and shell each offered different possibilities. The making of objects was an art of correspondence, in which material and meaning echoed one another. This sense of correspondence is why Egyptian culture can feel so coherent across such a vast stretch of time. The forms varied, the dynasties changed, the political situations shifted, but the vocabulary of symbols remained legible for generations. A lotus could still mean beauty and emergence. A feather could still mean truth. A serpent could still protect or threaten. A king could still be associated with the sun and the gods. Such stability does not imply stagnation. It suggests a civilization that found powerful ways to renew itself without abandoning the shapes of its memory. The memory of ancient Egypt also survives because later cultures kept returning to it. Greek and Roman writers observed it with admiration, curiosity, and sometimes misunderstanding. Medieval and early modern travelers brought back their own interpretations. Archaeologists later uncovered temples, grave, papyri, and villages, gradually restoring more of the old landscape. Every age has looked at Egypt differently, and that layered history of reception has become part of the story as well. The civilization exists not only in the past, but in the long chain of people who tried to imagine it. Sometimes this can make Egypt feel like a mirror for memory itself. We do not encounter it all at once. We encounter fragments, translations, reconstructions, and reimaginings. A statue in a museum, a relief in a book, a digitized papyrus, a site plan, a scholarly argument, a documentary image. Each form of access changes the shape of the experience. Yet all of them point back toward a civilization that understood the importance of form. Perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate so gently. It asks to be approached slowly. There is also something timeless in the way the Egyptians named and honored the dead. To speak a name aloud was to sustain presence. To carve a name in stone was to grant endurance. To forget a name was to risk a kind of disappearance. This gives language a quiet moral power. In our own lives, names carry affection and identity. In ancient Egypt, they also carried survival. A preserved name was a preserved relation. To inscribe someone was to keep them within the reach of memory. And so the ancient monuments become less like trophies and more like acts of care stretched across centuries. A pyramid is an architecture of permanence. A tomb inscription is a promise against erasure. A temple wall is a record of devotion. A statue is a body for a presence. A papyrus is a voice held in line and ink. All of these things whisper the same idea in different forms. Let what matters remain. As the night grows deeper, it is easy to rest with that idea. Let what matters remain. The river remains in its motion. The stars remain in their patient distance. The old names remain in fragments and echoes. The myths remain in their shifting stories. The stones remain warm from the day and then cool. The desert remains vast and still. The civilization remains not as a single fixed picture, but as a layered remembrance. And there is comfort in that layered remembrance. It allows the mind to move without strain, to wonder without needing to close the circle. One can imagine the first farmers watching the flood. One can imagine masons lifting blocks in the dawn. One can imagine a priest opening a shrine. One can imagine a child tracing a sign in dust. One can imagine a family eating quietly before sleep. One can imagine a queen, a scribe, a craftsperson, a boatman, a singer, a healer, a guard, a mother, an elder. The civilization becomes a chorus of small presences rather than a single loud voice. Perhaps this is the softest truth of all. Ancient Egypt endures because it made room for both majesty and ordinary life, both monument and detail, both cosmic order and the tenderness of daily care. It built for eternity, but it lived in mornings and evenings, in market paths and temple courtyards, in fields and workshops, in houses where lamps were lit and bread was shared. Its grandeur is real, but so is its quietness. So let the images loosen now slowly, like water sliding back into the river at night. Let the gods return to their stories. Let the stones rest. Let the painted walls dim. Let the papyrus fold into shadow. Let the boat drift near the bank and become still. Let the desert open under the stars without needing to be crossed. Let the names remain softly spoken and then simply held in silence. Ancient Egypt, with all its mysteries and careful facts, can now settle into the dark like a familiar dream. The long river continues somewhere beyond sight. The old temples stand in memory. The buried roads sleep beneath the sand. The stories keep their gentle watch. And we, listening from this quiet distance, can follow their calm rhythm a little longer until thought itself grows light and the night carries everything forward into rest.